Mike, I'm so psyched about this conversation we just had with Ajay Tripathy, who had built KubeCost and sold the company to IBM. He had had such a normal job at Google as a software developer before he became a startup founder and became quite successful.
I was really impressed with that fact because we hear a lot about how founders should just try different ideas and just go at it from day one. But he arguably did the smart thing. He took a job at Google. He worked in it a number of years, became quite successful. But in the meantime, he built relationships, met his co-founder there. He learned a ton about the problems that his customers were facing. And so when he had the opportunity in front of them, his success was actually quite inevitable before he even got started.
If you're a founder building a DevTool startup or you're thinking about leaving your corporate job to start one, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Let's jump right into it.
Let's go. Ajay, let's go back to the very beginning. You are working at Google.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're an engineer. You've been an engineer your whole career. At some point between then and now, you've decided to start a company.
Yeah, I think stories can have multiple beginnings depending where you start. I think even before that, I'd always wanted to start a company.
Why is that, or when did you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've always been interested in entrepreneurship and invention and things like that. And I think if you're talking about things that were exciting or inspiring growing up, like you see some of the Iron Man comes out and you see like the story of this guy who's an inventor and he starts his own company. And so that kind of mythology has always been really interesting to me. And also I just think that it's like owning your own output is a really, really good way to grow as someone who's interested in technology and things like that. Yeah, it had been a long vision. And I think, at Google, I met my co-founder and we had kind of like kicked ideas back and forth and, we've kind of left Google and we're looking for what was next. So it's a combination of always wanting to do a startup and leaving kind of the stars aligning on that front. And I think there's one more very, very personal story that I can share as well, which is there was a coworker of mine who were closely together. We had talked about starting a company and they passed away during like a particularly hard time in their life. And so I think it was like those two things where it's like life is short, like you should start a company. I actually firmly believe that there is a traumatic story for almost every founder in some respect, because it is really hard to go from a like very, very cushy engineering job so it's a combination of like your values and timing and something very traumatic happening.
It's a parallel with my Bill Gates' Microsoft story here. One of their co-founders also passed away.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how this. Yeah, they weren't a co-founder necessarily. We had just talked about starting companies together, and then they passed away. And I was like, well, like, look, life is short. Like, I've always wanted to do this. Then my co-founder at Google, and we had also, to get into the technical piece a little bit, we had been working, we had worked on Borg and Kubernetes at Google, and we saw a really big market opportunity to start building developer tools once, basically. So, developer tools that could be deployed anywhere Kubernetes is deployed for Kubernetes, right? As more people standardize this, deploy essentially like container management software.
By the time you left, you already knew that your co-founder was probably going to be the guy that you were going to start this with.
No, actually, we had both we had always talked about starting a company, but we actually triangulated on this idea a little bit separately. He had left and he'd started doing kind of software private equity or had been thinking about starting a fund or going to buy a company. And he had gotten really close with a DevTools company in a similar space, but it had ultimately gotten in and, I had been like, I'm not super interested in buying something. I want to start something. And I think he kind of arrived at that same idea, and we, had worked together at Google for a very long time. So we're like, this could be a really good partnership if we find it right.
You were a coder, he was not.
He is. He's a product manager at Google, but he has definitely programmed. Like, he built the original front end. Fortunately, like, we eventually did fortunately get him out of the coding.
But did that help him build the reputation with you? Is that
Yeah, I think so. I think I don't think there's a ton of space early on for, especially when you're doing like highly technical tools and you're scratching your own itch, right? In the developer tool space, right? Both people have to have a strong software background, right? Because you're ultimately you're building a product for yourself, right? Most people are building a product for themselves in their first iterations.
when you're in that gestational phase of ideas, how much do you think, and we're speaking to engineers right now, specifically engineers employed somewhere or independent builders, how much stock do you think they should put into their own conviction in something versus finding a person and sort of trusting somebody with that conviction? Because we all know for every engineer, there's a bunch of people in their life right now that are pitching them something.
Really? I would like more people to pitch me. My
Yes.
Please pitch me your ideas. But yeah, I would like more people to pitch me ideas. I love your ideas. I think it's. I don't think there's. I think there's not a ton of room for non-technical co-founders or people who don't understand the product. At least founders still should deeply understand the product. And you also have to deeply understand business in the market. So I think the best co-founders are just both, it's very, you come back to this like analogy of like T-shaped people, right? Where you can go really broad across and then you both have very, very deep specialties, right? So my specialty is, distributed systems, scaling, all that. And, his specialty is fundraising, selling, product experience. But we both cover both of those bases. We have a lot of overlap across those different aspects. And to come back to the original question, you have to trust your own taste, right? You're an owner in the business. Like you're taking on equal risk, maybe even more because these days, but maybe more, right? Because you have to compare that opportunity cost. So yeah, you have to trust your own taste. And even if your sort of abilities don't meet that taste right away, like you'll continue to build up to it.
We were talking to the CTO of XL Data yesterday, obviously a very successful company, a very successful leader. And he said something that stuck with me. He said, you have to understand yourself and you have to understand what you're going to specialize in. So if you want that $2 million a year or $20 million a year job that I've dropped there, not everybody's going to get it. You have to work up to having that expertise. But if you also want to be like a vibe coder for consumer apps, that's totally cool too. But you just have to grind that because the best vibe coders are going to be much better than the other vibe coders. I'm curious to get your reaction on that.
Just the best vibe coders being better,
or like picking your lane earlier.
Yeah, I think it'd be naive to assume that you can. I always tell people something like, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So I think it's some combination of you're good at, what do you enjoy, and what does the company need? And then you can kind of divide and conquer if you're fortunate enough to have a co-founder.
Speaking of divide and conquer, I think it's a good transition to your early relationship with your co-founder. How did you guys divide and conquer? And were there some conflicts early on? Were there disagreements? How'd you handle those?
Yeah, I think that we do have a lot of overlap especially in the early phases, and especially now, to bring it back to vibe coding. In the early days of getting that first demo out, getting your first sets of customers, I think both co-founders should be in there building, and we were, right? That doesn't mean everyone's writing code or making changes, but it does mean people are building out mocks. Maybe you're both vibe coding a little bit. Maybe your co-founder's reviewing the product side, or just you're bouncing ideas off of each other. And then, so in our days, I was actually just building the backend and he was building the front end. He actually, I think he would write JavaScript in Nano, actually.
Before
Writing JavaScript in Nano, and I thought he was crazy, but it was. I think there's a full circle there where you do something crazy enough and developers kind of look at you like you are crazy, right? Not even no Emacs, no Vimp, just straight Nano editing vanilla JavaScript, no React.
It's my first secret. I don't think I'd ever open Emacs.
Fair. Well, I don't know if you can say it on the pod. I'm a Vim person anyways. You don't have to be doing that if you're, they need to be in there building, right? To start, and then when you go to start demoing and seeing customers, and if you decide to go the venture-backed fundraising route, going out to venture, then I think naturally the roles start to split a little bit, where there's only so many hours in the day, and fundraising and demoing to customers is a full-time job, and that doesn't mean the co-founder takes none. So I think the way we kind of split there is I took over most of the back end. He was still patching the front end, here in the production and scaling is probably 80%, was probably 80% of the app back then. It might be like 95% now of the application with the way that vibe coding and Claude Code are going now. That might be even 95, maybe even more. Like the
For 95%?
the scaling, distributed systems, backend deployment of the software, metrics monitoring, the like uptime components, or maybe it'll be 0% in 2030. Who knows? Yeah. So I think at that point, someone is spending full days pitching, demoing, fundraising. And then, when we were getting to the final rounds of fundraising, that's where, I would come in, or whether it's a customer, whether it's some customer with really valuable insider feedback, I would sit with them. I think I can remember for our pre-seed round, I probably took about 4 fundraising meetings total, and my co-founder probably took 20 or 30 times as many. So probably 80 or 100. So I think when we were getting to the point of, okay, we're pretty sure this person's going to lead the round, I would interview the leads, the people who'd lead the round, and they would interview me. Or if we were getting close to closing, I think our first customer was actually a multi-billion-dollar healthcare company, and we're charging them like $50 a month or something. So we just wanted to see whether they would give us a check, or like whether we'd go through a purchasing process. So I did actually go through with my co-founder. There's a standard YC SaaS agreement. So we went through that, understood that together, and sat down with the person who wanted to buy the software. I think at that company, managers could put X dollars on their credit card, and we charged them X dollars. I don't mean the $50 a month, but it was the maximum that manager could put on their credit card. I sat down with him often, because once you get sort of a paying customer giving feedback, giving that feedback loop directly to the person building the software is very valuable. So there's still overlap there, but that first level of filtering, where there's a ton of VCs out there there's a ton of customers out there who will probably pull you in the wrong direction. But when you meet someone really valuable, I think both co-founders having exposure to that group or person is very helpful.
Preventing you from being pulled in the wrong direction by a customer.
Yeah, that's right. That's huge. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think you as a technical co-founder also need to develop that skill of when you know someone. And we had a big open source component of the project, and we would, if we let the open source kind of wag the dog there too much, that would have been pretty disastrous, right? Our focus was always to build something that we could sell for money.
Do you have any alpha on that? Any special advice because in every single early stage CTO that is right now working in enterprise, guaranteed they have a list of wish lists from every customer, and they're fighting an internal battle. But if we focus on our roadmap, then we can do so much more. It'll be so much scalable, but it's harder to map that to revenue. How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give some very generic startup advice that you have to just live to understand. And you've heard this probably a million times. It's do things that don't scale. Of course, you're never when you have 1,000 customers, your roadmap focus, right? When you have 10 customers, I think it's very reasonable to let those 10 customers pick your roadmap. I think you just go into it and, and looking back on it, if I were going to honestly assess kind of my own strengths and weaknesses, I am very, very strong at taking the customer feedback, turning it into actionable engineering line items and executing on those line items. I think the flip side of that is, sometimes the software is not going to scale to where we need it to be, or, the software quality will take a little bit of hit, because I'm not a purist on, it must be tested and these kinds of things. Obviously, those pay dividends later on, but you've got to get to that later on. So I think you definitely are doing things that don't scale. There's some really, really obvious heuristics. If this customer is 30% of your revenue, just do what they say. Just don't fight them too much. But at the same time, if this is a couple of people complaining about your open source. Maybe that's a good thing, right? Like maybe, you know, you can definitely take that feedback and that kind of stuff can go on the roadmap. You know, I think my biggest advice there is definitely, I don't know how to say it, it's like weaponize your roadmap, because startup timescales are so different from big company timescales, where it's like, so you have a customer that's 30% of your revenue and they need something like tomorrow. In your mind, that literally means tomorrow, but in like a VP of engineering's mind, I think what they actually mean is they need it this quarter. And that's an infinity of time in startup. Or we would often do this exercise of, okay, 1 quarter is actually 40% of the length of the company, early on, right? So where were we, 40% ago, right? So you can definitely, a very valid answer there is the alpha there is to cheat a little bit, right? So if you have a VP of engineering saying like they need this tomorrow, just very calmly, I think you can say something like, yeah, we're going to deliver this in 2 weeks. And that's tomorrow for them, but that's like 3 releases for you guys, right? I hope, or, 2 releases.
That's a huge part.
Yeah. So I think alpha there is you can do it all up to the point, right? Like, and when you have 1,000 customers, this isn't going to work. But when you have 10, you really can like both execute against this like long-term roadmap, deliver things like quote right away for really valuable customers, because their conception of right away doesn't align with a startup's conception.
I have a follow-up on open source.
Sure. Yeah.
So especially now, if we leave the vibe coding tools aside, how important do you think for a DevTools startup to have an open source offering that as it was?
I am a really big proponent of open source as a giant, with both giving value to people and being like a really good marketing channel for you guys. I don't want to overemphasize on recent events too much, but if you look at things like OpenClaw this week, but
They call OpenAI.
oh yeah, they're Club OpenAI this week. That's right. We got to relive that. Yeah. But OpenAI, OpenClaw, whatever they're called this week, is a huge example of like many people had been doing this agentified approach and nobody wanted to own the risk for it. And so I think the genius insight there is just like, okay, nobody's don't want to own the risk, like let the user own the risk, and then you just open source it. And that was actually a big component of our open source software, where it's like, hey, we're gonna be handling like very sensitive data for customers. We're gonna be in there, like turning off and on services to save people money. What if like we can just open source it, and then when we'll have developers, we'll have this really broad adoption, and when folks feel like they need a so-called like throat to choke, like someone to be responsible for the open source delivery and the security and all these other layers on top, they'll come to us. It's even okay if competitors build on top of our open source platform, because we are the thought leaders. So I think it is very important for developer tools to have an open source component these days, but by no means am I saying that you should give everything away or be an open source purist. I think these are kind of twofold. One is like that's this like broad, we'll say like, one is the value you deliver to the community. That's always very important. 2 is like it's very, very good marketing. And 3 is you are pushing the hard pieces, the pieces that your team is maybe not set up to build set up to service as a 2 to 3 person team out to end users. You can learn all about how they run and operate your software, bring that back. And then as you scale out your like sales engineers or support engineers, you can take those lessons and really, package them for enterprise. That's how I feel about open source go to market.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that there is also a real risk of overbuilding if one decides that, okay, we're going to start commercializing from day one, build it for enterprise, and then what if, you build a whole bunch of things that nobody wants?
For sure. It keeps you honest, right? In the sense that this idea that you brought up about overbuilding for one customer versus a roadmap, I think open source is a good way of keeping you honest, and listening to the community is a good way of keeping you honest. There's always going to be people who would say something like, well, why isn't this all free? You should just open source everything, and you can hear that feedback and take it as a good thing. Like, people want more in the open source, and there's always, I think it's a very healthy tension of what is open source, what is enterprise. Open source really is this way to go to scale really huge with with a small team, and not to say nothing of like contributions coming into the open source.
Good topics. Should we talk a little bit about like early team and start moving on from the very beginning? Yeah. So you guys have scaled the team pretty quickly, relatively speaking.
Yeah, and even more at the IBM that they acquired there. So yeah, I think
How many? So starting with you two,
Yeah.
how many engineers were in the team at the time of IBM's acquisition?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's there's a couple different ways to count it. The engineering team is kind of broken into support engineers, sales engineers, core developer, and sort of core developers. I want to say that was around 23 or 24 around the time of acquisition, and from day one to acquisition was, I think, 5 years. I know it's definitely 5 years because of QSBS. So 5 years and a handful of months, 5 years, 6 months, something like this. And so we kind of did that for. I'll speak to the engineering team. Sales was is somewhat different, but it was. My co-founder and I were the original people building product engineers, right? Then we hired two more sort of founding engineers. Then we had that core team getting onboarded and working, trying to figure out how to work together well. And then two more engineers in another kind of round after we raised a seed. And then we just like the team exploded, right? So we went, so it was 6 and then up to the 23. I think we're bringing on support and things like that all throughout the time. So that's when we brought on a more dedicated engineering manager, someone who would eventually sort of come.
What did you end up looking for in those very early ones? The first 4, let's say.
Yeah. So the first two were personal connections. One of them went to elementary school and high school with my co-founder. The other was referred to us from someone I had started a company with previous. And that company didn't work out, but he had met this person. And these two people, especially this, the person who we didn't directly know. The person we directly knew, like, they'd worked together for a very long time. I think it was a no-brainer. It was really, how can we get this guy to leave his high-paying job to come take a chance on us?
How'd you do it?
Deep personal connection. There's no shortcut. It was like, my co-founder would call him 3 times a week to talk about like progress in the company. And, he worked in gaming, which is a little bit more project-based, unstable. So he ended up leaving that company to come work with us. We paid, at the time we were a remote company. This was pre-COVID. This is 2019. And he worked in, I want to say North Carolina, one of the Carolinas. That's where my co-founder is from too. Yeah, one of the two, north or south. And we just paid mid-market San Francisco salaries across the country. So there's like some JAN and actually outside of the country too, which is, I think, unheard of at the time. It is somewhat harder to hire. Like, we had to go through a bunch of stuff to be able to hire contractors internationally. But, because we were remote first as a company, like, we took it seriously. I mean, my co-founder and I would still co-locate, but we actually just had separate offices and we would dial in together because we really believed in a remote first kind of culture. So part of it was that, right? Like we were paying basically top of market everywhere in the country except San Francisco, or more mid market. And then so that was just deep connection. And then the second person, we took a little bit of a chance on. They're a math major in college. They'd kind of picked up a little bit of programming and doing consulting, but more important than that, I think they started a coffee roasting company. So there was, and they had kind of switched off of that. That just founder mentality, I think, was enough where it's like, look, we can teach programming. Like, we are a very hardcore engineering company, right? Like, we had a lot of like scaling problems and these things, but like, we could teach that. And I have enough, right? Like, I can cover their sort of weaknesses as they start to be that, but I can't teach like the founder mentality or the mentality of like doing things that are really hard. I think one interesting coincidence among the first 4 of us is that we were all we all do. So this person who didn't have a ton of programming experience before did like Ironman, like, so triathlete, etc. My co-founder and I and his elementary school friend were all long distance swimmers in high school, and I didn't make it to college, but they were good enough. college. I also went to Berkeley, which has Olympic level swimmers on your swimming team, so I had no chance. I think just evidence that they've done. So like I always look for something that's basically just evidence that you've done something really hard in your life. That's it. That's the only qualification to work on this, and maybe even more so now with AI tools, etc. If you want to be an engineer, I would say there's, or this was also during the and things like that. So I mean, just look for evidence that someone's done something really hard in their life, like world-class levels of hard, and then don't worry too much about their actual qualification, like quote unquote qualification. So that you'll find a lot of talent that is overlooked at other places if you just find people who do hard stuff,
Like initiative and grit.
Initiative and grit. Grit is the only thing that even initiative, like, look, I mean, it's annoying for me to be in there telling everyone what to do, but that's also part of the like founder mode. If you this idea of like, I have enough initiative to supply you guys. It's just grit. Like number one is grit. Like if this person, like if you just don't give up, if you just don't die, like
I love clarity.
something only. Like you're the founder. Like you take initiative, right? Like not ever. Like if everyone in the world could take initiative, they would all start their own companies, and no one's going to take initiative the way that you take initiative. So yes, as a founder, yes, initiative, grit, consistent. Maybe creativity. All these things are important.
Would anything be different if you were to advise founders who are looking to hire the first engineers today?
Yeah, I think a lot has changed, and I think for I mean, all the standard advice is like don't hire until it hurts. To hire quick, fire quick. Those are all very very relevant today. I do think,
But like your first couple of engineering hires, if they happen to be humans.
I think even more so now with AI and stuff like I think it's just great. Like I think just look for people who are gonna stick it out, who have evidence of doing something like really crazy hard and just sticking to it. I don't think, I don't think it's, maybe this was controversial to say before, but it's very possible in 2030 like no one will have a job where they sit in front of a computer and think. So what are the skills that continue on? It's all just execution, right? It's all just, can you sit comfortably with something very, very challenging? And I think even more so now, I would just double down and of course there needs to be some evidence that they can prompt in Claude and that they don't just churn out AI slop. They're actually able to like understand what's going on or quickly learn to understand what's going on. But we definitely hired very unconventionally early on. And later on, there's a little bit more professionalization. Like, of course, like at some point I hope you will need staff engineers and people who really have scaled systems before. But early on, I think that's less relevant.
Did you end up coding throughout, or did you?
I was reviewing production. I mean, reviewing code is probably the new coding anyway. So I would say like I was in there reviewing code, especially where they touch basically like high scale systems, because like I hope you will quickly come upon this paradox growing so quickly that it is too expensive to simulate your traffic or your data. Like there's only production data, and building a copy of your production data is going to be prohibitively expensive. So it's like, okay, given that, we just have to think very, very deeply about the systems that touch high scale pieces of software, because you can't simulate your prod environment, or if you could, it would be very expensive. So those kinds of things, you can definitely hire people and trust them, but like at the end of the day, for the technical co-founder, like the buck stops with you, right? So like it's not acceptable for your production database to go down during a launch, right? That's like, it doesn't matter how much you trust people and verify. Like you need to build plans, and you need people to like go through those scaling checklists and those plans. But like at the end of the day, like you're gonna be in there reviewing it yourself, and I don't think there's a substitute for that. I'm big on the founder mode, and give people broad ownership over those pieces, but you have to be in the details of the technical. Or at least I believe you have to be in those details. Maybe even, I can't say if you're about, companies doing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, like maybe there's a point where it stops. But I think you'd be surprised having now talked to people who run really, really large scale systems. I think you'd be surprised how deep that expertise goes in at least places, at least, your OpenAI's, Anthropic's, Google's, Amazon's, Netflix's.
How do you physically structure your day around? You have to maintain mental context of pretty hard enterprise problems, but then you maybe have like two engineers fighting over a way to build something that you have to resolve at 2 p.m. all of a sudden.
Get curious, I think like the way to break deadlocks of engineers is just to ask questions, right? I hope that if you are doing your job right, those folks don't get into too much, or if you're engineering manager, whoever it is, there's it's not, these sorts of conflicts aren't ego driven or too upsetting or nasty. I think it's just like, you get curious on, I think a lot of the sort of conflicts we had were, right? Sorry. How so? Just, I think people would have come up with timelines that wouldn't work for the business, right? And I think so they want, and obviously want to do a good job and engineer things well, but we have to deliver something to this customer. But we promised to call back, like we promised it by the end of this quarter. So I think you get curious, right? So if one of your engineers is saying this is going to take 3 months, I think you say, okay, like, why do we think that? What have you considered that this piece can be out of scope? Or have you considered that a product has requested X, Y, and Z, but if Z is 90% of your timeline, have you asked whether we can live without it, right? Where's that really the MVP, right? So a lot of these, I think just taking a very even keel so it doesn't blow up your stack. To get to the original question on like how do you manage it, I think it's, get curious, make sure it doesn't blow your whole like context stack, and stay focused on the one or two things that are, I think at your stage, are probably closing. If you're an enterprise company, closing the enterprise.
I love that you're mentioning curiosity, because that seems like a way to build a culture of actually reading PRs. I've been thinking through this a lot because I don't think there's a bigger meme in tech than not reading PRs. But now, like you said, that is coding.
I think there's a major jump in coherence of things like, and maybe everyone has told me like, welcome to the real world in 2025, but I do think in December 2025, there's a major jump in coherence to where I had gone from doing a lot of prompting and actually like manually modifying code to just reviewing the design doc and asking for clarity in the planning section and then reading the PR. So I think that's less relevant now. I do think all that people will do in 2030 is read the PR, and maybe it's the changes will be very, very small. And I think that's as kind of as it should be. I mean, you assemble a car engine, right? Like the machines do the assembly. Like there are one or two pieces of finishing, especially if the engine goes out of tilt, like the screw gets looser. So you better tighten the screw. You don't build the whole engine anymore, right? No one person. I just don't think there's an option anymore. I just don't think that you will have to read code. Like that will be the whole job. So I don't know that that's going to be a problem anymore, other than in the sense of, do you trust people to, I think it becomes a broader question of like, do you trust people to do their job? Because we've taken all the writing away. And before, I think it's like, there was a very real like, okay, like I can read this PR. The cost of reading this PR is 3 to 6 more hours of work. But you take that same 3 to 6 hours, like the like 12 hours you spent writing should now be 1 hour, which means like you should have 11 hours to read. So like if you think of like your standard 12-hour workday at a startup, that's what it looked like before. It was like 9 hours of like writing the code, and then you're exhausted, and then you got to like cram.
So in a few minutes ago, you made a comment about maybe 95% of what we do has to do with scaling.
Okay, that's it.
Right? You said that. So just trying to bring the two together. So most of our customers were just not okay with Kubernetes, and especially the product that I managed, we basically had like this batteries included experience with Kubernetes. We shipped it. It was for data scientists. In any case, customers really had an issue with that, and we had like one person on our team who the Kubernetes designated expert. We started calling him Kubernetes engineer because that's what he was doing all day long. Like, he was just so good at Kubernetes. Everybody internally and our customers, everybody was tapping him for his Kubernetes expertise. So The question I have for you is, given what you're saying about where expertise is heading or the lack of that deep expertise, but also you made the comment about how much of the work is about, distributed engineering, scaling, and things like that. Where do we stand now in terms of the relevance of like the Kubernetes engineer? And then also the second part of that question is, how do you see that evolve like into 2030? So someone who is a Kubernetes expert today, like where do they stand and what do they do to continue to be relevant?
I think let me use an analogy here, and I know analogies can be challenging, but I think a lot about financial advisors, for example. I know it's a little out of left field, but there's in the 1980s, 90s, whatever, you would call up your stockbroker and be like, I want to buy this stock. And they would go like talk to the person on the trading floor. And then that person would like go buy the stock and so on and so on. And, someone would have to like manually change your asset allocation and things like that. And then we had, and then we're like, okay, like people can't actually pick stocks. That's crazy. It's crazy that we ever let people pick stocks. Let's just buy the whole market with index funds or something like that. And now that's all automated. You have a robo-advisor that changes your allocations. And we've driven the cost of that down from 100 basis points to 25 or something like that, right? It's the same thing. Like that's not to say there aren't some, I don't know, like venture capitalists who beat the market by picking individual companies, early on in the process. So, there will be some people who have that really, really deep understanding of a specific piece of technical stack. But I think at some point we'll be like, it's crazy that we ever let anyone write the code that an ATM or something. Really, it's crazy we ever let people drive cars. Like people are terrible at driving cars. So I think the analogy is like that. Like the folks who are genuinely want to become experts in something will find something unique to be experts in, where some kind of human deep knowledge is very valuable. We'll kind of move up and around the stack so that if the AI is launching, running your containers and orchestrating your containers, because that's what it's good at, that person will move more to the product definition side, or to something even more esoteric, and will be able to scale even, or that person will train the AI, right? I don't think experts are going anywhere. They're just gonna move, right? I think just like your money manager today is either the person who's your financial advisor is either going earlier, right, moving to venture, or doing some inventing new products, right? I think it's very similar.
So, okay, that's interesting. So you're saying this probably, they're not all going to become irrelevant, but the ones that are going to be relevant are ones that will either manage things at a much, much larger scale, pick up other skill sets, maybe train the AI that is managing it for the 99%.
Yeah, I think we lived in during a very brief period of history where the execution of tasks was difficult, if that makes sense. So maybe from 1930, the 1930s to 2030, there were the actual labor was challenging. But, in the 1800s, yes, there were good farmers, but by and large, farming was a simple task. The complexity of the actual work has increased from that. Is where we started building computers and highly technical, highly automated highly technical machining, right? Up till now the AI can do that. So what are we? We can. There's always gonna be room for craftsmen, right? We made quartz watches, but we didn't obsolete mechanical watches necessarily, right? So there's always gonna be room for that top tier of craftsmanship, just like there's probably people who were really, really good farmers and started to understand all the intricacies of and then you'll go to the other side. But I do think it was a unique time in history where the labor itself was really difficult. It's exciting that it's not anymore, because you can go work.
But it does sound like, just to make sure I understood this right, as of now, 2026, it does sound like scaling things, especially when you talk about distributed systems. It's not it's a done deal.
I don't think the AI can quite do that yet, but like today is the worst the AI is ever going to be. Like tomorrow will be better. So I think it's coming. I'd like it to be there, right? Or at least in my mind, I would like the AI to handle
all the jobs we got.
Yeah, well, not all the. Like I said, there's still there will be things on the margins to figure out. Yeah, I don't think it's like my honest opinion today, and maybe by the time the podcast comes out, I'll be wrong. But I I don't think the AI can quite take an application and put it in production to millions of users today. Like there's some business logic and humans in the loop and trade-offs and
You give me an idea. We should vibe code a museum of code, and yes, have like little snippets. Like this is a snippet.
this is the most beautifully crafted Y Combinator function that you have ever seen, and we don't do this anymore.
Written by Ajay. Tripathy.
Why not? Okay, so my code is open source, and you will see some absolute bangers there. But you also be some things that like, oh, this guy should not be allowed to write.
So maybe for our last quarter, we can talk about the current stage of your journey, which is getting acquired.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of founders aim when they start.
I have to disagree. Like, I don't think the end goal, like if you go back to like, I don't think if you go back to 10-year-old me, I don't think 10-year-old me wanted to be necessarily director of engineering at IBM or whatever I do now, right? I think the goal is always to build something that people find valuable, right? And you can, intrinsically, when you exit your company for hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, I hope for you, it's a good feeling to be like, yeah, we built something of value, like we can put a bow on it. But I don't think I would advise you, if you like really dream of being acquired, like you should just go work in M&A. You can do acquisitions every day. Like you could do an acquisition. Yeah. So I don't think that acquisition is the end goal. I think it's like when there is good synergy, when you feel like you've taken this as far as you can go. And I think really, I have actually learned a ton about how to go to market with enterprise software at IBM. I feel like 10-year-old me is like an inventor. I think we did a really great job getting to this like 10 million plus ARR, but this, the skills that got you from 0 to 1 or 0 to 1 million ARR are different from the skills that get you from 1 to 10 million ARR. And I think I'm just best suited from that in that like 0 to 10 range. And that's what I find most exciting and interesting is that 0 to 1 and that 1 to 10. And so I think in acquisition is a really good time if you like are excited by that 0 to 1 phase or the 1 to 10 phase to be like, okay, like I think someone else can take this from 10 to 100. And I do think we're doing that at IBM, and I'm learning a lot about how to do that. And I'm also coming to the realization that is that, on a next iteration, I'll have a bunch of the skills of that 10 to 100, but I really, really love this like 0 to 1 and 1 to 10.
And you think that those 10 to 100 skills are pretty distinct? Like they won't necessarily affect your 0 to 1 phase next time around.
No, I think like seeing the whole end, like it is really nice to see that 10 to 100 journey going on and like really understand it and learn, and have that skill to come back to the 0 phase. I would say like give it just an honest assessment of my skills. At the time where like I was completely new. I'd spent a lot of time in this 0 to 1 phase, and we learned this 1 to 10 phase as we go, and then like now I'm learning about this 10 to 100, and also seeing that maybe you can go 0 to 100 these days with AI and things like that, right? But it is, I mean, the skills are interesting and transferable, but at the time when we sold the company, I felt that like we had taken it, that like I think we sold, or like I think we started the conversation around 10 million in ARR and ended around 13. We had exited, and I think just I've learned a ton about how to go from that like 10 to 100, and it would have been much harder to get those skills.
What is the biggest thing that changes if you had to pick one? That's like
I think that founder mode becomes increasingly hard as you like. It is really hard to like get into every single engineer. Right.
And just get things done at will.
Yeah. And just to like do things quickly. And like, I think working through people is, so by the time we exited, and we're still at the company. I was, mostly managing managers, right? Which is, and being an executive is very different from being an engineering manager, and which is very different from being an IC. I think, an acquisition is a chance to learn some of those executive skills, or like it's a shortcut, right, to learn some of those executive skills at a really, really big company. And so those are really valuable. But you're also gonna have to unlearn them. Pack says 0, 1, and like you just put them in your back pocket, and they're there when you need them.
What are you learning from the inside now that AI has changed that 0 to 1? Now that you are looking at it from inside IBM, and imagine if you were where you are in their shoes, what would you buy? Like, what should companies aim to build that will be acquirable in the next couple?
So by the way, like I can do deals now, right? So if you have a company you want to sell to IBM, there we go. I mean, yeah.
So, what's your budgeting?
What's your finder's fee for that?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I think so. Again, one of the skills I've come to IBM to learn is IBM is just there. We are now kind of masters of just taking products and like pushing them out to a catalog of people that you have deep trust with, right? And that's sort of like trust relationship where I recommend software to you.
Sorry, can you explain that a little bit? What you said, taking products and pushing them to...
Okay, so IBM has deep relationships with Fortune 500 companies. They sell mainframes to them. They sell software applications on top of those mainframes, etc. So there's this like trust relationship with when IBM puts their stamp of approval on us. You maybe have heard this phrase, no one gets fired for buying IBM. It's because, IBM stands by their software and like, we'll fix it if it's broken and all these other things. And so let me talk about what is not going away with AI, which is that trust relationship, right? Like when you might recommend me to your listeners on the podcast, I'm not some like random person off the street, right? Like I have some relevant experience that would be useful to your viewers. And IBM is like, yeah, when we give you this software, like we stand by it. This is not some random startup off the street. We sell these things now that are just like eternal licenses, and literally eternal licenses. Like you pay one time, you get the software forever, as long as you want it. And IBM stands by it.
No, fun of it.
Yeah, it's and so until the heat death of the universe, like we stand by the software, right? Like as long as I
proposition.
Yeah, exactly, and that's sort of so. I know I'm starting with the contrapositive of your question, which is like what is not going away. It's that like trust relationship where you stand by the software forever. So I think the batch of AI companies are that I want to buy are the ones where people, actual humans, buy the output of AI. Like that it's not AI slop. You're not selling me just the AI slop. I don't know if you've seen the YC request for startups. Yeah, it's like agency model.
We were just talking about.
Yeah. So it's like you are scaling your agency with AI, but at the end of the day, like you deliver a result to me. And that has always been true, by the way, right? We don't sell cost optimization software. We sell a guarantee that your costs are going to go down when they use our software, and that you're going to get you're going to achieve your business outcome. We have never sold just software, and so those are the companies I want to buy and, by the way, invest in. Right? Like I want to buy, and IBM will buy companies where folks stand by the business outcomes of their AI, not software. Like no one. It is entirely possible. You've probably heard like this like SaaS is dead idea. And I mean, SaaS has always been dead. We only sell outcomes, right? Like, and that's where the margin is, right? Because when someone comes into you, it has always been like, SaaS has always been like a build versus buy decision for early stage companies, right? It's like, our team can do this in 3 months. Why don't they do it? It's like, I don't know. Why don't they do it, right? Like yes, there's some like, okay, your engineers make X million dollars per engineer, so the real cost of your software is 4 times because they could have been doing this other thing, had 4x margin, whatever your profit per employee is. But ultimately, like you could have built it yourself, and that's like saying like, okay, we could build HubSpot. Right? Okay, we could build HubSpot internally, right? Well, you can, but that's not what HubSpot is. Like HubSpot sells you a guarantee that like you can get analytics out of your data, not the actual analytics software, right?
It's a great example because incidentally, they didn't even start with software. Started. They were very, very profitable before they started building code.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why and I'm a big fan. It's those. Long story short is like, IBM wants to buy companies where people stand by the business outcomes of their software.
But since you started a DevTool company, you cost, and now you're in charge of innovation at IBM.
Not at all of.
Not in charge of all innovation for innovation inside IBM. Great though, if you're listening, Arabish, I'm available for that job.
All right, IBM, I hope you're paying attention to this. Okay, so You talk about trust, and what was going on in my head is that Copilot was announced. I was thinking that great product, but many enterprise CIOs and CXOs were getting excited about it. They were asking people to use it, and then along came Cursor and then Claude. What's interesting is that I keep hearing, and Michael has mentioned this too, that a number of engineers today, even in big enterprises, are using some combination of Cursor and Claude, but not so much GitHub Copilot. I don't know if you would agree about like the stack rank of products these days. And of course, these things tend to change so rapidly. In any case, where I'm going with this is the following. So there's the top-down or an incumbent building a good enough product, which is a case of GitHub Copilot, versus the cursors and the Claude code of the world, the bottoms-up adoption. That's one thing, how you think about that. But the other piece also I want to ask you about is how should you as a startup founder of a DevTool company today think about competition when it seems like there are just way too many ways of doing things and people seem to be trying a bunch of different things.
So, but let's zoom out for a second, right? I know this is frothy, right? Like, but this is like recency. Predict you too much, but I think that's recency bias, right? Like fast forward 10 years, like especially if AI is writing all your code, like what is a head start today, right? Like just because Cursor is like better today or Claude is better today, I mean, yes, you've invested in your own flywheel to like improve Claude, but like when you zoom out, let's look at like cloud providers, for example, right? AWS, totally dominant, right? But like for a while, but like let's zoom out a little bit. Like Azure and GCP have very much built out the same features that AWS has. And so like what does Azure sell versus AWS today? Like, yes, there are some like application layers on top, some interesting SageMaker versus blanking on what Azure calls their AI thing, but there's some non-commodity layer on top, but the core platforms have are basically very similar at this point, right? So I think part of the reason, for example, can take market share from AWS is like they have these deep relationships of like reciprocal software relationships between like Microsoft and, Fortune 500 company X, whereas Amazon or like Walmart's a great example, right? Like Walmart moved to GCP because they compete with Amazon, right? So like when the platform starts to commoditize a little bit, when you zoom out a little bit, when commoditization happens, it does come back to these trust relationships. And so, yeah, I think people will use whatever is best right now. But I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to say like Copilot's not going to be better than Claude in 2030. We really don't know. Like things are changing so fast that one, you probably want a basket of all of these. Like you want to be able to like use whatever is best for your startup. But two is like you don't want to over-index on like who is best today question is like it's fun when you bet on it on Kalshi or whatever, but it's like who's the best platform at the end of the year. But like in a sense, we're in inning one, right? So there's not going to be lock-in. There's not going to be these other things. I think it's very difficult to predict a winner. And by the way, if you can predict a winner, let me know for my call sheet. But I think
I love that perspective, a timeline-based perspective. And the other takeaway I have is we'll be looking out for IBM's coding agent or what an one. Okay.
Oh, am I allowed to say this? Watson. No. Look at IBM stock recently. I mean, like there is a really big appetite, and IBM has been there for a really, really long time with, natural language and Watson and things like that. And IBM is in the position of having this sort of trust relationship with really large enterprises where when it's ready, they will stand by, right? And it's still, so like I said, it's still inning one. It's much too early to say.
Felt like a true IBM. Why do we have IBM in common?
I think so. I want to sneak one technical question. Well, we'll see if we keep it. But looking at the future, do you think Moore's Law is coming for LLMs?
Oh, that'd be great. Love that. I would love for that to be true. I wonder what, this idea of exponentiation, though, because you've invested in building out the agents that make your code good, right? Like, it should happen, right? Like, the better your coding agent, the faster the AI can write itself and so on and so on. So like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some power law, these like jumps in coherence for AI. As far as like GPUs getting more efficient, I need to come back to get back to you on that one. Like we are working on some like very interesting GPU optimization software, but these are at the like application and packing level. That's where our like expertise is and where we live. It's kind of like, how can I get more out of the GPUs I have today? Not to plug this idea too much on your podcast, but for example, like inference and training jobs, right? Like they should be interleaved, right? When inference levels are high, like during the day, when people ask a lot of questions on OpenAI, I mean, I know this, it's global, but by data center it'll vary too. Then like, interleave for training jobs, like very simple optimizations like this are still very much in the cube cost target layer for application optimization. So that kind of stuff, we still think deeply about that. As far as like lower level than that, I know there's some interesting stuff there. I'm just not as much of an expert on what's going on below the application layer.
We'll all find out together. Yeah. Cool. This is great. I learned so much.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.